somebody who's a rapturist who believes that would suggest that this is referring to a snatching away, where there's a disappearance of Christians prior to a 7-year period of tribulation. Now, where did that idea come from? If you look at the first, I would say, up until the 19th century, it's argued that this idea didn't really exist in any organized form.
Hey, well, welcome to the Office Theology Podcast. I have special guest Chris Palmer, and we are tackling the hot take of end times and Revelation. But I should say, Chris is tackling it, and I'm just here to listen and here to watch. So Chris, he's the Dean of Theos U and Theos Seminary, international teacher, Greek scholar, professor of theology, and an author as well. And you're working on your PhD, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm about 6 months out from it. It's been a 6-year project and at the University of Wales, and we are on our way to being done. So happy about that.
It's been a 6-year process and you're 6 months out?
That's about,
That's great.
I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train, hopefully. So
yeah, and what is it in?
It's a PhD, so philosophy and religion, and my thesis is an exploration of theodicy and suffering in the book of Revelation. So I've had to deal with a lot of source material from Revelation, kind of getting at it a different way, but it's been a philosophical and theological journey. Happy for it to be done. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, well, tell us a little more about you if you want. Just let us into the life of Chris a little bit.
Cool, man. Well, love your page. Love Office Theology. It always makes me laugh. It's in the meme world we come from. It's good to have an ally like yourself. Mm-hmm. So, Theos U memes are fans of you, so we're in good company. But yeah,
do you want to know a funny story real quick about Theos U memes?
Yes.
So 11 months ago, I responded to a Theos U memes when my account had like 300 followers, and I don't know who it was, but someone messaged me back saying, "The Office meme page is never funny and will never make it." Someone straight up roasted me, and I'm like, okay, number one is an accident. I thought it was my personal page and whatever, but it was just really funny.
And here you are.
Here I am. We are allies in the meme world now.
The meme page,
anyways, keep going.
The meme page is wrong once in a blue moon, I suppose.
I suppose. Just don't throw me in jail for it.
No, you get a pass for this. You get a pass.
Okay, phew. Okay, tell us more about you.
From Michigan, moved to California 2 years ago, and then was with Theos U, started building the school and the seminary that we now have, and we moved ourselves to Franklin, Tennessee. So I'm joining you today from Franklin.
Nice.
Yeah, I have been teaching at the professor level for almost 5 years, and I love theology. And it's great to have conversations anytime we talk about the book of Revelation. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. Super appreciative of it. And this would be a good time for people listening. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a 3-month, it's a gift card for a 3-month subscription to Theos U that we're going to do a giveaway with. So make sure you look out for that. And so you can hear all of the wonderful teaching that Chris talks about. Okay, so we're going to hop into the topic. Probably about a month and a half ago now, I did a hot take on end times and Revelation, and this is how it panned out after I shared with you about several thousand responses. But before we jump into the polls, we need to do some definition work. So what is the Great Tribulation?
So it depends who you ask what the Great Tribulation is. If you're, I think maybe the first question we want to establish is millennial views. So the way that I say it in our class at Theos U is that how people think about the millennium is the waypoint for people to begin thinking about the Lord's return. And for that reason, Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 5, there's mention of a 1,000-year period. People so there's different ways of thinking about this that have emerged throughout the millennia of church history. What do you do with that 1,000-year period? A position called the historic premill position will say that that's a literal 1,000 years, and Jesus comes back and returns at the beginning of that 1,000 years and rules bodily on the earth for 1,000 years. Then there's a position called Amil, and some people typically say that it means that they don't believe there's really a millennium, but it's probably not true to form. They would say that the 1,000 years is not a literal 1,000 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the church period, or the time of the church that began with the second advent of Christ and continues until Christ returns. And when Christ returns, we go into the new heaven and the new earth. There's in both of those positions presume that there's going to be times of suffering. Those
Mm-hmm.
positions would look at possibly the potentiality of an increased time of suffering that's going to take place before Christ comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a post-mill position where they look at and say, hey, you know what? We're kind of like the on-mill position, but we also believe that things are actually going to get better before Jesus returns.
Yeah.
And then you have where that language is extracted, for the most part, is a position called pre-tribulation, premillennialism, and it gets confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And these individuals believe that there's a second return of Christ, well, particularly a third, but there's a
Yeah.
catching away of the church that
Mm-hmm.
takes place before a 7-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And after that 7-year period, Christ returns bodily, and then there's a 1,000-year period, and then Satan's loosed, and there's the new heavens and the new earth. So,
Yeah.
depending on who you ask, the Great Tribulation usually these days is used by pre-tribulation, premillennialists to refer to the last
Mm-hmm.
3.5 years of that 7 years tribulation. So,
Okay.
which a pre-tribulationist individual doesn't believe that they'll be here during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the Great Tribulation in dispensational terms. If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and so those are usually the crosshairs of Theos U memes, the dispensationalists, right?
Yeah, they get caught in the crossfires. They absolutely do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they certainly are pushed to the limits, and I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
because we don't like dispensationalists per se. I just think
Mm-hmm.
that we like to pick on theology that sort of is winning the day.
Yeah.
Um, Theological positions people really haven't thought about, like, why do I hold this eschatological position, and they're not doing it in spite of anyone. It's just what they grew up hearing, what they taught.
Mm-hmm.
um, it stands to reason that all of us have inherited our theology. If we haven't thought about we have two options, Brennan. We've either thought about our theology or we've inherited our theology. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that all inherited theology is bad, but even if we've inherited it, we'd like it serves us well to think about it. And
Mm-hmm.
we may, in thinking about it, have to adjust our positions. And that doesn't mean we're deconstructing. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that we're walking away from Christ, or it doesn't mean that we're part of some great falling away, or we're being rebellious. It just means
Yeah.
that theology is a conversation that we're not always a conversation that we never try to put a period on it, because there's
Yeah.
always more to say and there's always ways to say it differently.
Hmm.
So,
That's well said. And I think what I'm gonna learn probably specifically is from this conversation. Every simple question is probably a little more intricate than I'm realizing with that. So that all came from what is the Great Tribulation, and so
there's a
I love that.
question. It was probably a
Yeah.
question you got. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so that's helpful. That helps bring some context to it. Where does the term rapture come from? And this question, rapture is in
Yeah.
quotes, just to clarify.
So in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, there's the use of this word in the Greek, harpazo. It means to catch
Mm-hmm.
away or take out of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's referring to what happens at the moment of Christ's return. The three millennial views, which are post-mill, historic pre-mill, and a-mill, would say that this language is referring to a time where Christ comes back, and it's using language from Daniel chapter 7, various
Mm-hmm.
places of the Old Testament, to describe descriptively
Mm-hmm.
how it's going to be when saints go meet the Lord at his return.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they don't look at it necessarily as a snatching away, a secret snatching away of the Lord. They look at it as a descriptive language, creative language
Mm-hmm.
that's being used to express the joy and
Yeah.
elation and what the experience is going to be like when Jesus returns and he comes back for his people. somebody
Okay.
who's a rapturist,
Mm-hmm.
who believes that would suggest that this is referring to a snatching away, where there's a disappearance of Christians prior to a 7-year period of tribulation. Now, where did that idea come from? If you look at the first, I would say, up until the 19th century, it's argued that this idea didn't really exist in any
Mm-hmm.
organized form. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
scholars, they're legitimate dispensational. I'll refer to these individuals as dispensationalists, and we won't get into that right now why. These dispensationalists would say, well, people believe this before that. I've read their works and their cases. It's really hard to make a case that anybody was believing prior to the 19th century
Yeah.
that there's going to be a snatching away. Um, there was a figure by the name of John Nelson Darby, and he's
Mm-hmm.
sort of become popular in theological circles to talk about this guy, who emerged out of an Urbinite meeting in the UK, where he began to purport this idea of a second secret snatching away.
Mm-hmm.
This became popularized by a gentleman named C.I. Scofield, who wrote what is called the Scofield Bible, where
Mm-hmm.
he took Darby's system that included, excuse me, a pre-tribulation rapture, and made it very popular within the footnotes of this Bible. Now, this Bible sold into the millions and was very popular among evangelicals.
Mm.
Fundamentalism was emerging at that time as a counter to what's the word, Darwinism. And so the
Yeah.
fundamentalists really took the Darby system, and it became very popular. And then the Pentecostals kind of latched onto it for other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And before you knew it,
Mm-hmm.
Darbyism and this idea of a rapture was becoming very popular.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we find eschatology today.
Yeah. And this in after Darby and kind of all of that, that's when the series Left Behind kind of became popular,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, eventually,
Yeah.
Darby was in the 19th. It was in the early 20th century, even before that. But
Mm-hmm.
Scofield's Bible comes out in the early 20th century, and then in the 70s, Hal Lindsey,
Mm-hmm.
the late great Planet Earth, begins to sold 30 million copies, and then
Wow.
that was an influence for the Left Behind series, which ended up selling, I think, present day 80 million copies. And so a lot of people, the only thing they've ever known eschatologically
Yeah.
is this. But when you look back in the first century, but if you go to the 16th century when Michelangelo is painting
Mm-hmm.
and he's putting up the Lord's Return, I mean, it doesn't seem very violent. It
Yeah.
seems. You look at the painting, the frescoes that he has on the Sistine Chapel of the Lord's Return. It doesn't look like the conspiratorial Lord's Return that we have today, where there's a secret snatching away. You just
Yeah.
don't see that. So, history of interpretation is very important when it comes to
Yeah.
eschatology, and the way that things were being interpreted. We know from artists and from culture and from popular readings at that time, really didn't have this idea of a pre-tribulation rapture.
Hmm. That's interesting. It's funny because I feel like a lot of people on my page will reference Left Behind and like how
Yeah,
it scared them and different stuff like that. But
of
I
course.
don't know if you know, but I grew up like hardcore LDS, like Mormon,
Mm.
and so that I had my own issues to deal with growing up that way, but
Yeah,
Left Behind was not one of them because I'm like,
sure.
and I try watching, I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Like I couldn't do it,
yeah.
but that's helpful. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very popular, and a lot of people, that's just what they were given, and that's what they
yeah,
know, and they assume. But the encouraging thing is that it's a very late reading of.
yeah,
It's a very late reading of eschatology. It's very new,
yeah.
relatively speaking, and there's other ways of thinking about it that
Hmm.
have been around much longer.
Yeah, and I heard you kind of alluded to it. A lot of people have either been handed down their theology or they've thought about their theology. And what I'm learning, just even from these poll numbers that I'll share in a little bit, is a lot of people, their view on the end times have been handed down to them. They haven't put a
Yep.
lot of thought into it because I think the conversation of end times or even the book of Revelation can seem really, really intimidating. So they're like, I'm
Yep.
not sure what to do with this. And this person seems like they've done the most research. Sure, I'll just kind of adopt that. But I've also noticed a lot of people hold it pretty loosely, at least that I've talked to. Like I'm not really sure. I kind of because it's probably a younger generation I deal with that have just kind of not written off. That's the wrong way to put it, but they're not really holding it with a closed fist. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're talking about their eschatology. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Some,
Yeah.
some people, yeah, there's always the proverbial apology from pastors when they go to preach the book of Revelation, because they know that people are hesitant towards talking about it, owing to how it's been very conspiratorial in the last
Yeah.
150 years.
Oh yeah.
And people and pastors today of healthy congregations don't really want to be involved in anything conspiratorial. They don't want to weird their
Mm-hmm.
people out. They know where their people are at. And anything they preach, they want it to be encouraging. They want it to be uplifting. They want it to be something that can
Mm-hmm.
sustain their lives and help build faithful communities of people who follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And trying to follow, Rayford Steele and Chloe in the Left Behind series as they run through the deserts and they use satellites to track down the Antichrist is anything but that. And so they make apologies for it.
Oh,
The
man.
good news is that people are moving away from this attitude that evangelicals, even Pentecostals, have had towards the book of Revelation, specifically in North America, for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I would say that there is a renaissance of the book of Revelation that is taking place. And it was happening inside of scholarly circles first,
Mm-hmm.
and it's moving its way into pastors and pulpits of churches, and I can start seeing evidence for that. And so I think it's helpful to rethink how we've been thinking about the book of Revelation.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's what's exciting too is I've been studying and diving deep as well, because the church I'm a pastor at, we're kicking off starting January 14th, going through the book of Revelation. And I've been talking with our lead pastor quite a bit and just kind of like wrestling through all that this is, because he grew up like true, like AG Assemblies of God, kind of in that circle. And I haven't really heard much. I mean, learned much about it beyond just reading through like Bible plans. But yeah, we're excited to go through it and kind of help our people think about it differently. And it's crazy how many people, after we announce, they're like, I might not come to church for those several months that we're going through it, because they're nervous about it.
Yeah, they're very nervous. Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't come to church, but I understand their hesitations.
Yeah.
Nothing has really been, I mean, when we think of book of Revelation, there's this scary, fantastic imagery in it. But we just, we just did a town hall at Theos U. And my way into Revelation is when I did in my thesis work that I worked on for 6 years.
Yeah.
My largest chapter, my fourth chapter, is a excuse me, I'm getting over a cold here. And I'm at the itchy throat cough stage.
Yep. Perfect for interviews.
Perfect for interviews. It's our last town hall. We coughed so much. We're gonna make a montage out of it. But the reading that I did engages the text, and my fourth chapter is about 150 page commentary on the book of Revelation from 1 to chapter 22. And what I really love about it is that it's just a narrative reading of the text.
Yeah.
And a narrative reading means that it's dealing specifically with what's there in the text and what's not there in the text. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of put aside the categories for a second and not have to decide, do I want to come at this as a pre-mill? Do I want to come at this as an a-mill? Where's the rapture at? Is the rapture not in here? And kind of start off on the foot that everybody gives to you. And basically the method, we can talk about that another time, that I came at it with was like, let's just deal with what's in the text and what a hearer might hear as they read the text. And working through that was tremendously helpful. And one thing that began to emerge from this is, Revelation is not a chronology about how the world is going to end. Revelation is not a map about God's future dealings specifically with. No scholar says that.
Yeah.
Scholars that are looking at it and understanding how apocalyptic emerged, particularly in the Second Temple period, a little bit before that, but it was really kind of caught fire in this period of time. was owing to the people of God's suffering, as well as the expectation that God would vindicate that suffering,
Hmm.
and seeing how the wicked was not necessarily how the wicked was sort of getting ahead, and how the people of God had to suffer. And how do you write
Hmm.
to people that are suffering? How do you write to people that are being very faithful to God and experiencing loss and experiencing tragedy in a
Hmm.
way that can encourage them that God was going to somehow vindicate their judgment without actually explaining how he's going to do it?
Yeah.
And there was this apocalyptic was a genre that would use symbolism to do that and to explain that, and a lot of it that we find in Revelation recalls what the Johannine community would be very familiar with, and that is imagery and words and language that comes from the Gospel of John, as
Hmm.
well as um, imagery that comes from the Old Testament. And so when you
Yeah.
start considering what the hearers would recall from those places in Scripture that the community in Revelation would have been familiar with, you start to get a picture of a text that was written to people to encourage them to
Hmm.
see how their experience was how God was being faithful to them in their experience of suffering, I should say.
Yeah.
And
That's
that and
good.
that is and that's very timeless to us.
Yeah.
You know, I could show you kind of how that reads. I'll give you an example. I'd
Yeah.
like to get into the text a little bit.
Let's do it.
Because, yeah, so basically, if you go to Revelation, and I'm not, and look at for people that are listening, I'm not saying that has to be what you do
Hmm.
and take it or leave it type thing, but just consider the possibility of what's going on in the text. It's kind of how
Yeah.
we approach things as scholars. In Revelation chapter 2, Jesus is giving a prophetic message to 7 churches, and he gets to this church in Smyrna, which is where present day Izmir is at today.
Hmm.
It's buried under that city, actually. It's one of the 7
Oh, wow.
churches you can't actually see because it's under Izmir, so good luck trying to get to it.
Yeah.
And it was a very faithful church. And Jesus tells them, I know that you're poor, but you're
Hmm.
rich. And then he says to them, and some of you, which in the Greek is the partitive genitive, doesn't mean all of them, but there's going to be some of them, which is kind of interesting because, right, it's not all of them, but there are some of them. Some
Hmm.
of you are going to be thrown into prison by the devil for 10 days. And Christ encourages them to overcome. So you're like, wow, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And so my thing is just kind of acknowledge it's there, shelve it for a while, don't go ham with it. Just kind of don't try to read into it. Just you have this language that they're going to be thrown in the prison for 10 days.
Hmm.
Just hold it loosely for now, and just let more unfold itself without trying to be overly conclusive about that there.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says I'm going to throw you in prison for 10 days,
Yeah.
but be faithful, etc., etc. Actually, let me I'll pull it
And
up in
so
case.
while you're pulling it up, is that the problem of when people read it and they want to, I'm trying to say this carefully, like make more out of it than what's actually there. Like they're
Yeah, they
trying to
do. Yeah,
make it overly symbolic and stuff like that.
yeah. I think you know what it is. They just get ahead of themselves. I think
Yeah.
sometimes they just get ahead of themselves. So they're trying to be conclusive right there. It's going to literal. It's not a literal, and they're already talking about that, and they're no longer in the text anymore. And then they're talking about their favorite theologians and what the Theos says, and before you know it, they've gone on side of the text.
Yeah.
They're trying to decipher it, trying to draw applications to it,
Hmm.
and we never really finish with it. So it
Yeah.
says, excuse me. I know your tribulation, your poverty, and the slander of those who say that they're Jews or not, but the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil's about to throw some of you in prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you'll have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I'll give you the crown of life. I mean, that is a
Hmm.
wonderful promise.
Yeah.
So as you go through the text, you get into chapter 4 and 5. You get into chapter 3, which is more to suffering churches that are in Revelation.
Hmm.
Some of them are not so much suffering. You could argue that Laodicea and Sardis aren't really suffering. Philadelphia is. But maybe they're not suffering because they're compromising to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
So
Ooh.
then you get to chapter 4 and 5.
Ooh, that'll
And
preach.
there you go. That will preach.
Yeah.
And then you get to chapter 4 and 5, and there's the throne room. There's heaven.
Yeah.
Chapter 6, you see the judgments. Okay, so you eventually get into the seals. You get into the bowl. You get into the trumpets and the bowls. Okay, but there's this idea, this reoccurring theme of vindication that's taking place, and how is God answering the cries of the souls on the altar in Revelation, the fifth seal in Revelation chapter 6, 9 to 10. And so, I mean, we could walk through it if we had time. If I was doing a class on it, we'd go through all these verses, but you start seeing how God is, how things are slowly working to vindicate those who are suffering, those who have been thrown in prison 10 days. Okay. So you get to chapter 20. Okay. Let me pull it up. You get to Revelation chapter 20, and hopefully you haven't really forgotten anything. And, in the title, in the ESV, it says the 1,000 years. So if you haven't really if you kind of are willing to put your categories down for a second.
Categories not being like pre-mill, stuff like that.
Well, Augustine's pre-mill, or Augustine's amill, and the Church of Didache is pre-mill, and all these. Put those as all that stuff. Okay. And well, the church fathers are wrong. The Council of Ephesus, and we're not in the text anymore, mind you.
Is that a jab at Gabe?
I think it was a jab at our conversation we just had.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So then you see this in verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the keys to the bottomless pit and a great chain. He sees the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil, and bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into a pit and sealed it over him so he might not deceive the nations any longer. 1,000 years ended that he might be released. So let's just stop for a second. What does this language sound like to you?
Are you asking me? I thought it was...
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know the answer, I'll give it to you. But so then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain, and he seized the dragon, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Does that sound like anything that we've encountered in the narrative yet?
I'd say no.
It sounds like maybe it might remind you of the church in Smyrna who was thrown into prison.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
See the connection there? I think it's possible you could argue.
Yeah.
Maybe what's going on here is that those who were thrown into prison for 10 days are seeing that the one who thrown them into prison is actually the one who threw them into prison is actually being thrown into the abyss, not for 10 days, but for 1,000 years.
Oh, okay.
And so what if that's the case? And so when you start to line up the Greek and the language, you see the word cast, you see the word throw, very similar language.
Yeah. You
see the word prison. But you're not being thrown into prison. You're thrown into worse. You're being thrown into the abyss. And then, it's not 1,000. It's not days. It's years. And 10 is the lowest decimal of 10 units that is being used in Revelation. 1,000 is the highest. And so I think what you actually could be showing here is that it would signal to the hearers that whatever the 1,000 years is referring to, whether it's a figurative or whether it's a literal 1,000 years, it's showing the ultimate defeat of the enemy and vindication that is coming for those who are in Christ Jesus, those who have suffered innocently. So that is a really good way to preach it, because that will preach. And you haven't gotten into yet, well, are you amill? Well, are you pre-mill? Or are you post-mill? But what you are saying is that despite those categories, Jesus is going to bring justice. And Jesus sees everyone who has suffered innocently. Jesus sees those who have been faithful to him in spite of their sorrows and have gone through life and felt unseen. He sees them.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because thinking to the hearers of that church, what is about to happen to you or what's happened to you is going to happen to the one that's doing that to you, but finally,
and in a greater way.
Yeah, in a greater way, and justice will be served, and Christ will have the victory. And it's like when you get stuck in just the camp arguments, I feel like you miss the beauty of that. Like, I mean, at least the ones I've heard and watched and listened to, I'm like, you're right. A lot of people end up quoting, they'll use scripture to hop into their favorite theologian on their preferred stance.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just the beauty of
Yeah, we have a
connecting
yeah, we
those.
have yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a text guy.
Yeah.
I like to work in the text, but we don't have a lot of individuals in Bible school that go to Bible school and actually are taught to go into the text and actually become good readers of the text.
Mm-hmm.
And my thing is, like we said, we start with these categories and then we build out, or that's where we begin. Anybody that's doesn't really fit our category, all mills are at war with the pre-mills and on and on.
Yeah.
Dispensationalists don't want to hear it from anybody else. It's like, but we're not readers of the text.
Yeah. Huh. Well, that's good. I appreciate that and sharing that a lot. A question, I'm kind of looking at the show notes here. And I want to ask you, what would you say to the Christian who wants to start studying Revelation?
Yeah.
What are a few things you'd have to keep in mind while doing so?
So first of all, you can't begin. You have to begin with understanding, number one, the apocalyptic genre. That's
Hmm.
primo importance.
Yeah.
If you don't get what the genre is doing, you can forget about it. Like that is so essential.
Yeah. What
Is
is the
understanding.
apocalyptic literature or
Yeah,
genre doing
yeah.
then?
Okay, so for instance, we have gospel narrative:
Yep.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it's a narrative, and it's historic narrative in a sense that kind of is. You could argue it's Greco-Roman biography in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what to expect. You have epistles. You understand the nature of an epistle. It's instructional.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, you have Psalms. Okay, there's songs. You have Proverbs. They're pithy sayings. When you get to the Book of Revelation, it is a genre that really came out of wisdom as well as prophetic. Because
Hmm.
in the wisdom, you get taught how do you live in suffering. Proverbs
Mm-hmm.
kind of deals with that.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes absolutely deals with that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the Old Testament pseudepigrapha deals with that, which is other writings during the Old Testament time that didn't make it into Scripture. Some of the Apocrypha deals with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you have the prophetic writings, which declares the goodness of God and the faithfulness of God,
Yeah.
and that kind of has like a love child, and it creates in the intertestamental period this hybrid genre, which is apocalyptic,
Yeah.
which deals with the goodness of God in the face of suffering. And it's not necessarily trying to explain it because it doesn't. But what it does is it tries to encourage you and exhort you to live faithful to God in spite of the fact that suffering takes place. Like that's what it's doing. So when you
Mm.
read like the Apocalypse of Abraham, or when you read Fourth Ezra, which is part of Second Esdras,
Mm-hmm.
you will see, okay, the Book of Enoch. I know everybody's
Yeah.
on the Book of Enoch, but that was not written by Enoch. I'm sorry to break it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll see how those themes are all in there. So Revelation is, if you look at Second Baruch, it's very similar. There are parts from those texts that are very similar to Revelation because it's dealing
Hmm.
with the same themes. Okay, understanding that and how that works, a lot of it is using imagery to encourage people to live faithful unto Yahweh or unto God, or when you have a Christian apocalypse, unto Christ.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to do. It sets your expectations correctly. And then it also tells you how it gets you there to make that. And it's using apocalyptic imagery that would have communicated that to people: dragons,
Mm-hmm.
women,
Mm-hmm.
okay, beasts, the
Yeah.
sea, things that these individuals would know what it was about. And
Yeah.
so your expectations in reading those kind of brings you over to Revelation, like, okay, this is what this is doing here.
Yeah.
This is what it's doing. It's not just out here trying to predict the end of the world. It's trying to set the right. It
Yeah.
gives you start on the right foot.
So first things first, have the proper filter of what you're about to read everything through. And that's
Yeah,
understanding what the point of that
understanding
literature is.
understanding the genre is very
Okay.
important.
Perfect.
Understand the
Okay.
Yep.
So from there, then say you understand that, okay, this is what it
Yep.
is.
So then you gotta, then I would say the next thing you do is understand John, because we
Hmm.
start with we start with the premise that the Apostle John is the writer. So
Okay.
he's going to use language that's familiar to his community who has his
Yeah.
gospel, and he's going to use language that's familiar to himself. So have a read of the Gospel of John. Spend time reading
Hmm.
the book of John, because a lot of that imagery is going to appear, a lot of those words, a lot of that vocabulary from the Gospel of John, the language, the verbs, the nouns, okay, is going to reappear in the book of Revelation. And so when you're trying to figure out what darkness,
Mm-hmm.
what would the hearers think about when they hear darkness? Well, how is darkness used in the book of John? How is the
Yeah.
word cosmos used in the book of John? How is love used in the book of John? What are these things? What do these things recall? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that kind of gives you a place to go. So when you're working through apocalyptic literature, you should be recalling the book of John. You should be recalling places in the Old Testament where imagery is coming from. And then number 3 is to be familiar with Old Testament imagery. Be familiar with the Old Testament scenes, because Revelation likes to think back to the Exodus,
Mm.
likes to think back to places in Daniel, likes
Yeah.
to think back to places in Ezekiel. And it's kind of
Yeah.
taking that language. But biblical authors often would take language from the Old Testament or John or the
Mm-hmm.
Old Testament and kind of repurpose it
Yeah.
and do something different with that language to serve what it is they're trying to say. So don't be surprised when you see language in Revelation being repurposed for another purpose. And
Yeah.
that's what apocalyptic does.
Yeah. Okay. So then as they're going through reading Revelation, I think a lot of people, even according to the polls, so how their interpretation or leaning of Revelation, literal or metaphorical, about 60% said metaphorical and 40% said literal. How would you wrestle with the tension of literal versus metaphorical in
Yeah.
apocalyptic literature?
So apocalyptic is so the book of Revelation. Apocalyptic is more oftentimes is using imagery. I mean, how do you gonna a 7-head 10-horned beast? I mean, what are you gonna do with that? And the people that are literal, they usually get stuck when it comes to those types of things. Okay,
Yeah.
um, uh, the woman who flees out into the desert. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these are hard to get around in literal. But the confusing part with Revelation becomes the fact that it really is it's an apocalyptic genre, but it's even more of a monster. It's more Michael Gorman calls it a hybrid genre
Mm.
because it also is epistolatory.
Yeah.
Apocalypses don't have usually at the beginning of them a message to 7 churches,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and you don't see that in most of the apocalypse from the intertestamental period. So you have this epistolatory element from it in the first 3 chapters.
Yeah.
Send these to the churches, pass it around, 7 churches, and so I think you have to realize there are places in the text that are
Mm-hmm.
literal, a literal 7 churches. But then again, I think literal also the 7 churches functions in a way that is it just convenient that there's 7 churches, or was there literal historic 7 churches? But 7 there also represents the fact that it's for the message for the church universal. I think the
Mm.
way John writes, I allow for some leniency for that, because John does use a lot of double entendre when you go through the
Yeah.
text and you realize he means one thing and he also means another. It's not always and or, it can be both and, or
Yeah.
this or that. It could be both.
Yeah.
So there are places to answer that. I know this isn't probably very helpful. There are places where it's certainly literal.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus commanded John to write.
Yeah.
The fact that there's a guy named Antipas in Pergamum who seems to have died. Well, he doesn't
Mm.
seem to have died. He's died. Is he real?
Yeah.
Is he figurative? I don't know a scholar out there. I have read every commentary on the Book of Revelation since 1906, almost word for word. Everyone that matters. That's
Yeah,
just
that's
the
fair.
nature of writing a commentary. So there's really not much I'm not aware of in some of these things. I mean, I'm sure there's
Mm-hmm.
one or two I'm not aware of. Okay, but
Yeah.
I don't know of anyone that took that figuratively.
Mm.
And so there, I think you can take those literal. But then when you get to places where you see the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. I don't think
Yeah.
that's at all literal. I
Yeah.
think that's figurative. That's pointing at something.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Well, the new heavens and the new earth," the golden streets. I mean, here's another thing that's interesting to consider.
Yeah.
Let's go to Revelation 11. I'll show you something that is just kind of a cool read. And
Let's do
because
it.
maybe the better question to ask is, how can I preach Revelation to my church, in a way that
Yeah.
is powerful? And you get Revelation 11, which is the dead center of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Revelation 12 is the turning point, which is kind of like it marks a major significant structural change in it.
Mm-hmm.
But Revelation 11 is very important.
Yeah.
And it says in verse 1 that you have, we'll just start, in verse 3. And it says here, I grant my authority to my two witnesses. Now, people reading Revelation are going to want to know, who are the two witnesses? And the dispensationalists will always say, well, it's Enoch and Elijah, or it has to be somebody who was caught up with God to come back because they come from heaven. And let's just put all that aside for a second.
Yeah.
Not go there, because we really don't have that in the text, do we?
Yep.
It's not there.
Nope.
It's not telling us anything. So I don't know if the text doesn't give that to us, we're bringing it to the text, and I don't like doing that. That's not how I work methodologically. Okay, so 1,360 days. Okay, we can get through all that. But look what we see here is when they finish their testimony. Excuse me. The beast rises from the bottomless pit. He'll make war on them. He conquers them, and he kills them. And their dead bodies lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. Now, this is a very interesting passage because for the first time, we see the Greek word platia, which is the word street.
Yeah.
And it says that their bodies lay there. The Greek text indicates first of all, according to Jewish law, you had to bury criminals.
Yeah.
You can't just leave criminals laying out there.
Mm.
There's dignity even a criminal's death. There's no dignity in the death of these two witnesses. These two witnesses are brutalized by the beast. Let's not even try to figure out who the beast is right now.
Yeah.
Let's just figure that the beast just brutalized them. And then where it says here that they kill them, the word here, kill, apoktano, is a brutal death, is a very brutal, torturous death, and
So
there's no
more than
dignity.
just casually kill them. It's like brutally kill them.
It.
Okay.
This is describing a very brutal, sadistic. This is definitely unjust in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I'm looking off camera because I'm reading along with you
please.
right now.
Yeah, please. Okay, so in doing this, let's sit in this for a second. We think, man, picture that for a second. Just the imagery. And let's not even try to make it literal figure. They're just like, what's the imagery of people being killed and left on the street? No dignity. And these are servants of God. These are people that love the Lord and they're doing exactly what God tells them to do. They're his messengers. They're his witnesses. And it's like, it forms questions in your mind like, this is the way that the people of God are treated. This is the way that God anoints them. He sends them. He empowers them. They have great ministry success in their obedience. And then they're killed, and then they're left on the street with no dignity. I mean, who does that sound like to you? Sounds like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like the way Jesus suffered.
Yeah.
I mean, they gambled for his clothes, etc. Okay. So understanding that, we go to Revelation chapter 21. And let's see something here. Let's see here. So Revelation chapter 21. Let me just, my Logos is being slow. Okay, Revelation chapter 21. And we get to verse number 21. And we have a description of the New Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And it says here, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made of a single pearl. And the street of the city was pure gold like transparent glass. Now think about this for a second. The last time that we saw any mention excuse me, of the word street was in verse number 11, chapter 11, where the bodies were left on the street with no dignity, left to die and left to rot, for people to scoff at them. And yet the same individuals who have been faithful to God are now brought into the city of the New Jerusalem, where God has vindicated their suffering. And the hero discovers that the streets are made of gold. In a sense, that seems to me that they may hear vindication.
Yeah.
Those who have suffered brutally on the streets now inherit streets that are made of gold, streets that welcome them into the kingdom and recompenses their unjust suffering. So I don't think it's going too far to say that the early church, the early readers may have been making these types of connections and been reading this way in a way that they say, man, God is really going to vindicate our suffering. And so this is consistent with a genre that's explained to people in story form why they should continue following Jesus and being faithful to him. And see, what we're not doing is speculating. We're not making this about the end times. We're just making this about a story about how to be faithful to Jesus. And so the applications for our life are not just one dimensional. They become multidimensional.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I love that, because I think what you're doing is challenging the let's stop trying to figure out if something's literal or not literal, and actually zoom out at what the point of the book is. And I heard you say it several times so far in the conversation. Revelation deals with the goodness of God in the midst of suffering. So this is meant to be an encouragement and an exhortation of continue on no matter the amount of suffering and injustice you face as a faithful follower of Christ. It will be justified, it will be vindicated, and he will have his justice at the end.
Yeah, and that's precisely what apocalyptic literature seeks to do. It seeks to kind of cover those themes. That's why I'm saying, okay, that's your expectation of Revelation. That's I think you're starting off on the right foot.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be way less intimidating, because I feel like just probably recently, the past couple of months, Revelation's turned a corner for me as well, because I'm not I feel like going into, I have to figure out where I land on certain things, because that's the biggest debate in the book of Revelation. So rather than going in thinking I need to read this to figure out a stance, it's more hey, read it for how John intended it for the audience. And that's encouragement in the goodness of God in the midst of suffering. Ooh.
Yeah, I think that's what it does. And it takes the pressure off of you to have all these categories. I mean, look, I wrote 150-page commentary on it, and it doesn't, which is a small commentary, to be honest with you, but it was informed by all kinds of scholarship and never once had to deal with what does Chris believe about the millennial reign. What does Chris? Yeah, I understand. You'd have to think to yourself at some point, when is Jesus coming? Because I'm not saying it's not important to answer that question. Yeah. But I do think that millennial passage is a pretty obscure verse.
Yeah.
And it's to me interesting that the creeds don't necessarily try to hash out historic pre-mill from Amil.
He's coming back.
He's coming back
when he wants.
When he wants. And it seems to me that the real focus of the letter is, how do we handle this? How do we be faithful? Because the real call is not to have it figured out when he comes back, but how do we be faithful? Not that it doesn't matter when he comes.
Yeah.
But to be faithful until he comes. And that really is the message. And I think if pastors, I always tell pastors, hey, look, book of Revelation up for grabs right now. Yeah. For the longest time, it's been read by dispensational premillennialists.
Mm-hmm.
pre-tribulationists, I should say,
Yeah.
and I think we need to rethink it. I mean, I was very disappointed, but not looking down on people, but disappointed to see during COVID and how there was
Oh my
just end time
gosh.
speculation on stuff, and that that could move you one of two ways. You can have a real sour look about the book of Revelation, or
Yeah.
you could say, hey, it's time that we get this right.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be gracious to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that we need to be throwing each other on the bus when it comes to these things. And
Yeah.
being a good reader of the text is important. And I would encourage
Yeah.
anybody that's listening, instead of fooling around with categories,
Mm-hmm.
making that your only endeavor, and reading books that try to decode things for you, it does serve you if you're going to be serious about it to get serious about learning Koine Greek.
Mm.
Get serious about learning it to the point that you become familiar with how John writes,
Yeah.
the vocabulary that John uses, the verbs that he uses, the participles that he uses, etc. And seeing
Yeah.
how the Greek text in John kind of aligns with the Greek text in the book of Revelation, and to see what
Mm.
is John doing with some of the elements, what is John doing with some of the language that he's using. Because when you have that skill, your reading of Revelation is certainly to have more depth to it than just hashing out the categories and what the fathers say about that.
Oh yeah. And I love that, because I think it's like, here's the reading, and then once you're able to kind of understand and study that level of Greek, you're like,
Yeah,
this hole goes deeper than I thought. This is a rabbit trail that's
1,000.
way deeper than I thought.
Yep,
That's
very
good.
true. Yeah,
Hey,
man.
so for the last few minutes, this flew by.
Yeah,
Hopefully there can be a part 2 sometime.
cool.
Um,
Anytime.
let's ask. So these are submitted questions from my followers that they were really concerned about, but we're gonna
Sure.
like rapid fire them. Okay.
Shoot them out. Cool.
Um, why are boomers obsessed with the end times? Was the first one.
The easy answer to that question is, without throwing anybody into the bus, boomers came up in a time where they're inundated with end time dispensational eschatology that was promoted by TBN, CBN, 700 Club, the Jim Baker's, what was his club called? PTL Club.
Hmm.
And that was all the rage back then. They were the first ones to get their hands on The Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. So the time formed them to think about it that way. A good study
Mm-hmm.
for you to do is get a copy of Late Great Planet Earth, which was written in 1970 when the boomers were in their 20s, and
Hmm.
read that and just see. And remember, and don't take that book lightly. That sold 30 million copies.
Oh wow.
And see how that formed them. That was how people were reading.
Yeah.
And that created, what that did was it politicized our readings of Revelation. It made very conspiratorial. It connected government technology to and government weapons to decoding the book of Revelation, and it became turned into date setting. And so boomers were
Hmm.
formed during that time.
Yeah.
That's basically
Just a
it.
product of their environment and the
Yeah,
teachings
and
that
you'll
they
find out
received.
those boomers that are obsessed with it are in North America pretty much. If you go to UK, you're not going to find many of them there unless they've
Hmm.
been influenced by North America. Preachers coming out of
Oh.
North America. So
USA, baby. All right. Why are end times talked about more around elections, politics, and world events?
I mean, within the question is the answer, right? I
That's
mean,
that's fair.
within the question is the answer.
Yeah.
I think because, as we were saying before, there is a conspiratorial agenda behind end times that for Jesus to return,
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be the rapture is going to. So the people that would subscribe to this, the pre-tribulational dispensationalists, would believe that the rapture of the church is going to occur before
Hmm.
a period of a tribulation period of 7 years. In that
Okay.
tribulation period of 7 years, they believe in something called the revised, or they may say revived, Roman Empire. And they believe that Europe's going to have to reform itself under the
Hmm.
revived Roman Empire. This is what they teach. Finis Dake, get God's plan for man. Get a Dake Bible. You can read all about it. So anytime they see any type of movement, war taking place in Israel, the president's working with it's not Israel, excuse me, Europe. They think that all of Europe's going to be reformed. They think that Russia's Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 37, 38, and they think that they're gonna there's a worldwide plan to reshape this. And elections usually have to do with the restructuring and reformation of government. And so it becomes, like I said, they become obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And this is why elections usually create end times fervor. Wars create end times fervor because they see the reforming of Europe turn into the revived Roman Empire. And they're taught to believe that prior to that happening, there's a rapture. And so you can connect the dots.
Yeah, especially now as the time that when we're recording this, there's a Hamas and Israel conflict and war going on. And so it's just
so I've left
exploded even more.
Yeah, I've left Israel out of this specifically because I don't want this to become a political podcast, but there's a lot that has to do with that.
And I'll probably get banned for some reason for saying those words at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot to this that would deal with that. We'll take that up another time.
Okay, so last two questions. What is the mark of the beast?
So
or maybe there's only one question left for our time.
Yeah, so I have a class that I deal with that at Theos U where I talk about that. So you have to deal with Revelation chapter 13, the beast coming up out of the sea, the beast coming up out of the water or the ocean, the sea, and the beast coming up out of the land. I think the mark of the beast, quite simply, and I can explain to you how I arrive here, but has to do with people whose lifestyle follows the beast. And I think the beast has a lot to do with a politicized system that is that serves people, that promotes living contrary to Jesus. Okay. And so when people begin to live and order their lives in a way that is contrary to following Jesus, I think that they're following the beast. And I think the mark of the beast has to do with that, more so than a literal actual mark on people's skin or a microchip. I think it's a line in your lives in a way that shows that you're not being faithful to the Lamb, because contextually everything in Revelation has to do with this faithfulness to Christ and this faithfulness to the Lord. And those that aren't that way line themselves up with the beast. In Scripture, it shows how so it has to be this, right? Those who are faithful to Jesus within Scripture have on them written, the name of God. You see this. So you see how they receive a mark. The faithful in Christ receive a mark. Yeah. And I think that mark is a way, is their faithfulness. They're aligned. They're known by God. But I think that those that are unfaithful are known as those that have lined up with the beast. So I don't necessarily ascribe to people taking a literal mark, or your credit cards or the vaccination or whatever it may be. Yeah,
that's good, man. I wish we could keep going, but we'll have to have a part 2 with this. But so I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight and your knowledge. And once again, if you have not checked out Theos U, go subscribe. It is probably cheap. It's 10 times cheaper than what you're probably paying for coffee on a monthly basis anyways. So make sure you go listen to all the excellent content there. Chris, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Brennan. And long live the office theology. That's right. We will continue onward and making fun of everybody under the sun, and no matter what camp you find yourself in. So make sure you follow Chris on all things social media. And so thank you. Thank you so much.